I think it's time to get started. I see a lot of amazing and energized faces here, and we are going to need your energy throughout this project. So, my name is Lars Ling, and I have the pleasure of being I call it a quest manager. I didn't have a title for this, so I invented this title for this opportunity to be part of planning this process and executing it to the end. So I have the privilege of being the first one to formally welcome you all to this, what we consider the most important and at the same time exciting mission we each of us have ever been on. In just a moment, we'll introduce you to what this mission is about and how it works. But I just have a few housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, as you noticed, we are recording the whole session here. If you end up making a statement, a presentation that you would really like to be left out of the recording, simply let us know, and we can arrange that. We are not shy, and we are aiming at transforming things that are really hard to transform. So we like to talk about hard things and do something about it. And we hope you're up for that as well. So let's not get anything in the way of our mission. A few speakers today will speak in Spanish, and some will speak in English. And that's the nature of an international world. We are going to do our best to try to summarize each of the presentations. If they're given in Spanish, the summary will be in English and vice versa. So don't worry if you feel that one of the languages is a bit hard. We want you here, whether you speak Spanish or English. As I said, use the Zoom chat in parallel to the discussions that are happening. Make sure to engage. This quest is a collaborative effort to transform and to leapfrog Latin America. So we need you all on board to do that. All right, without further ado, I want to hand over to our Master of Ceremonies today. And he's looking behind him to see where's that Master of Ceremony. Who is that? Who is that? That's Salim Ismail. Over to you, Salim.
All right, thank you, Lars, and for I'm super thrilled, Lars, that we have you as our kind of shepherd for this. You have your incredible Educate for Life community inside the EXO world. We are here on the third major initiative that EXO and OpenEXO has ever launched. The first was the EXO Sprint, the second was the Fast Track Sprint, and this is the third. And I'll describe it a little bit more in detail. The objective of this overall exercise of this quest is really to figure out what should education look like. There's lots of people that have a good sense of the problems. There's some people that have some sense of what to do about it, but we want to paint a future picture of what could it look like, right? So this bridges into some of Ken Merkel's work on Sci-Fi Hive. You have Institute for the Future doing visioning and scenario planning type work. This has a different objective, which I'll describe in a little bit later. But as we kick off, I'd like to invite Laura from Latin Leap to say a few words and kind of officially welcome us into this. Laura Gomez is our champion over there, and she is in part funding this this overall exercise. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Salim. First of all, I'm super excited to be here and to have these great minds with us. So everybody, as Salim said, I am Laura Gomez and I work as a general partner in Latin Leap. I'm a serial entrepreneur and definitely a big dreamer. We are very happy and thankful to have you all here with us in the beginning of this EXO Quest sponsored by Latin Leap. So Latin America today, just to give us a little bit of context, has one of the world's weakest education systems and remains as the world's most unequal region. On top of this, in Latin America, 22.2 million children and adolescents do not attend to school or are at risk of dropping out each year. So we do think that we live in unprecedented times, as you might know. The speed of change makes the eternal catching up strategy of Latin America unsustainable. We need to leapfrog, and that is why we are all here. So we have to anticipate and together find ways to prevent the region from becoming, and some of you have heard me saying this repeatedly, what Yuval Harari calls in his book, The Useless Class. So our main goal with this adventure that we're starting today is to envision a better future for education globally. Latin America will be the sandbox to adapt new technologies, new methodologies, and create an ecosystem, hopefully, of novel solutions that help this region most pressing problems regarding education. So with your help and contribution, we're seeking to leapfrog Latin America through the disruption of education. It's not a small dream to have. So that's Latin Leap's mission. And that is why together with ExO, we decided to create this quest. It is worth it. So afterwards, and having in mind all the discussions and highlights that will come out of this quest and the great vision as a guiding star, Latin Leap will create a fund to invest in solutions that take the region closer to that vision. Because we do believe that all starts with a vision. So this quest will bring some great minds like yours together to contribute and hopefully create this appealing roadmap to prosperity. We hope you are as eager as we are to go bold after this worthwhile goal. Así que bienvenidos y muchas gracias por ayudarnos a crear y a creer juntos en que podemos contribuir a un mejor futuro. Salim, back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And Laura has been relentless and energetic in chasing us to get this done. So this a lot of the reason is her entrepreneurial nature in getting us this far. So I want to take a step back and speak about for a few minutes where we are overall globally, and then specifically what the problem that we're trying to solve in this initiative and the approach we're taking to do it. Okay, and then we're going to hear from a few speakers specifically about Latin America, and we have a few live folks dialing in, and they will contribute also. So many of you, if you're in the EXO community, will have heard me speak about this before. Ever since the book came out, we've been focused on how do we solve the immune system problem. We started with the EXO sprint in big companies, and we've roughly cracked that problem now. We've now done 50 or so major sprints with Procter & Gamble, HP, Black & Decker, Visa. They are reporting an average 70 times return on investment from running the sprint. So we found a way of hacking culture at scale in a big company. And this was, if you remember, this is my experience at Yahoo, where the more disruptive an idea we came up with, the more the company couldn't handle it, right? And that was a young company of less than 10 years old. What hope is there for a bank or a telco, etc.? We then set up the Fast Track Institute in Miami to do the same approach in public sector, because now you have to deal with regulatory policy, and that's a much harder problem. And we have an enormous issue globally in this area. Bankers are fighting Bitcoin, taxis are fighting Uber. And we have, as I talk about it, we have 20 Gutenberg moments coming along. The printing press changed the world in the 15th century, but solar energy changes the world. Blockchain completely changes the world. AI completely changes the world. And we have 20 of those, right? And in our opinion, this breaks every institution that we use to run the world currently. Journalism is now pretty much broken. Education is breaking or largely broken. We have, and Laura mentioned some of the issues there. And in fact, I can't spot an institution that doesn't break in the face of this transformation. The challenge is our leaders are not trained for this. Most of our leadership training today is 20th century status quo, incremental, linear, stable environments. And the train is pulling into black swan station, right? And finally, most of the action, certainly implementation, is happening at a very local level and then being implemented locally. So these are some of the broader dynamics that we have to solve for when we take our next step. Now, the fast track sprint, we've done several times, 4 times in Medellin in Colombia. We ran it with the mayor of Miami 3-4 years ago. And part of the reason Miami is such a hotbed right now is our fault a bit. We laid down the vocabulary that you hear coming out of the mayor and thinking about Miami as the future. In terms of the next step for us is how do we break the immune system in an institutional level? And we've chosen education as our first one to pilot this. Probably about one of the most important institutions that we could think of to start with. So we've been waiting for the right partner and the right opportunity to kick it off. And I'm thrilled with Laura and Latin Leap and the folks that she's assembled and the folks involved, that they're really thinking at a transformational level. And we check, early on we said, so do you want to transform this or this? And they're like, no, transformation, education, global. We're like, okay, we like this. And so we're kicking this process off. Now, as Lars said, we are recording this, but this is not a public event. This is, we want to keep this closed and small to a limited number for a very specific reason, which I'll talk about in a second. And the reason is we want to kind of do the deep thinking. That type of work is best done in a smaller group. Okay. Once you have the broad structure, then you can do open innovation in other areas. Something we found very powerfully when we were building Singularity University and also at XPRIZE, we have with us here Xenia Tata, who ran prizes at XPRIZE for a few years, and she'll give a few of her comments. We found that the young, energetic, entrepreneurial type were great at finding solutions, but not great at asking the right questions or finding the right problems. And so what we did at Singularity is we posed the faculty or the board would pose the problem spaces, the grand challenges. And once you have that, then you let the entrepreneurial mindset, the young, unstructured, freed from university, well, let me not go into that paradigm, but basically can then approach the problem from a very creative way and really come up with new solutions. So we, in this case, we're trying for something very specific, which is to figure out a path to solving the immune system problem in education, because the worst resistance to the transformation in education, or the people in education, academia, is about the second worst immune system I've ever come across. Religion is the worst, where they will literally kill you if you don't, comply with the thing. In academia, they'll kill your career, but they won't kill you physically. So it's a slightly better from that perspective. I want to give a quick anecdote here. About 4 years ago, I was asked to give a talk at the conference of 700 deans of business schools. Okay, who knew? But there's actually an event where all of the deans of the business schools get together once a year. And so I was the opening keynote. The organizer gets up, very excited, says, Salim is here to talk about the latest he's seeing in exponential organizations, et cetera, et cetera. Except from the audience, what you see is totally blank looks. They have no idea what he's talking about. He sees this and he says, looks around the audience and says, how many of you have heard of Exponential Organizations, the book? And out of 700 deans, 2 put up their hands, right? Now, not that everybody should read the book or whatever, but if I'm a car designer, I should know that Tesla is a thing, right? I should know about it and have an opinion position about it. And none of them had ever heard of this thing. And afterwards they were very excited, etc. But the challenge is they're all operating from old frameworks, right? And from a business school perspective, there is still not a single business school in the world that can teach you how to build Uber, right? And so we have an enormous challenge in updating education because of the regulatory. I'll give one last example, which is back from Singularity University, about 2 years into the development of SU. to deal with very fast-moving technologies, we created a real-time curriculum development methodology. So if there was some breakthrough in neuroscience or AI, we would convene the faculty, see how it affected the different disciplines, and be teaching that. The curriculum changed about 20% a quarter. 2 years in, we get a call from the California Board of Education saying, who are you? You can't be calling yourselves a university. And we said, well, what does it take? And it turned out that to be a university and to be accredited, you have to fix your curriculum and never change it, which is antithetical to the world, right? So we're like, but wait, we do it this way. In the end, they gave us an exception to the regulations and said, please don't give out a degree because we couldn't do what we were doing unless we, so I'm using this as a small example, but this pervades all of the education system. And I'll give one last example, which is Nicole Dreisky, who some of you know, who's created a program that in one weekend using media is able to increase literacy amongst kids by 100% in a weekend. The challenge is you try and get that into the curriculum and it's almost impossible. And so this is the enormous difficulty we have. The classroom has not changed in 200 years. Desks, chairs, teacher at the front, waving a stick and a chalkboard or whatever. I mean, this is, it's kind of a tragedy that we've not updated that model and what should it look like. So the issue here and the problem we're trying to solve is there's lots of breakthroughs in education. How do we get that into the system is the enormous question. And I want to show you a slide that we've developed to talk about this. So let me share my screen. And this is the process we want to follow in the quest, okay? So again, note that the objective here is breaking the immune system and coming up with some future sense of this. Can you folks see my screen?
No.
Yep.
Okay. So step one is let's bring together the 20 or 30 global most cutting edge thought leaders in education, the Esther Wojcicki's, and if he was alive, Ken Robinson and the Salman Khans of the world who did the Khan Academy, et cetera, and bring them together into a group and discuss the major problem spaces in education. For example, today we do push-based education and we're moving to pull-based learning systems as we move on. I often ask the question, how much of your university education do you actually use in the workplace? And the answer is near zero, right? And the most valuable employees and colleagues and teammates we have in our companies and our teams are the ones that learn the fastest. And so that's a powerful paradigm. So bring them together. Let's explore the major problem spaces in education. Number two, give them a briefing of the exponential technologies and major breakthroughs that are coming. Neural implants, AI-based tutoring, blockchain-based micro-credentialing, etc. For example, via Xenia's work, the Literacy X Prize has now been won in Africa. We now have an Android app that can teach any child functional literacy in about a year, and it's free. And that, if I'm guessing most of the people that are senior in education globally have no idea, and this would change their view of education. I'll give one more example, which is a Chinese company called Lishuo, I think. I may have the pronunciation wrong. I probably have the pronunciation wrong. They've developed an AI chatbot to teach English as a second language. And it turns out this AI chatbot is 3 times better at teaching English than a personal private human tutor, and it scales, right? So we can essentially solve ESL, basically. And most of the educators in the world have no idea. I was talking to the education minister in Thailand. He was trying to hire 40,000 teachers to teach English. And you're like, excuse me, there's this thing over here. And you would save a massive, massive amount of money, hassle, difficulty if you could implement that. But try getting an AI chatbot approved by any academic environment and watch the immune system response. So let's get up to speed on what are the major breakthroughs coming, and not just the technologies, but what's the socio-political environment? Will we be dealing with UBI in the future? Most education today is designed for job schooling, right? We train our kids through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Well, is that the right purpose of the future as we enter a world of abundance? And those are the questions that aren't getting asked anywhere. The third step in this is probably the most important, is let's do a 2-3 day retreat and paint a picture of what education should and could look like over, say, a 20-year period. And we picked that time period because it forces us out of the existing structures. It pushes us out of our comfortable boundaries past any regulatory and day-to-day crap that we're dealing with. And it forces you to paint a picture. And I would suggest that that group of 20 people, armed with the awareness of what's coming, are probably the best group in the world around to paint that picture, right? Of what should it look like. And it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, and it won't be. It just has to point in the right direction, right? The fourth step is then to curate who's doing what. Now that we have a vision, who's doing what around the world, and let's curate solutions. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, etc. And the final step, once you've got some curation done, is to do a backcasting exercise and say, okay, if we want to do that in 20 years, where do we have to be in 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, etc. And now we have a roadmap. Now, what we do with this final output is not put it on a website, not do a TED talk on it, just keep it really low key, because the minute you talk about it, the entire academic world will find ways of attacking it. And part of the reason of getting these 20 thought leaders is if some random academic at the University of X goes, well, I disagree with this, you can basically say, go talk to these 20 people, and you basically have enough critical mass to ignore them, or at least have the folks that are making decisions have a little bit more respect about the future. So that's the basic process. One of the outputs of this, and the next step, we're trying to get control of what's called an IGO. IGO stands for Intergovernmental Organization, which is actually a nonprofit sanctioned by the UN with its address at the UN building in New York. And an IGO has the enormous, fascinating characteristic that you can sign treaties with governments, okay? So if we get the output of what education should look like, and via our access to various heads of state, get presidents, prime ministers to sign up to this vision of the future, over time, the education systems will start to point in that direction. At the same time, we're building grassroots products, services, investment opportunities, companies to serve that future. So that's the broad picture of where we're going. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions or comments, and then we'll kick off. Any comments, questions, etc.
Am I on?
Yes, we can hear you, Klaus.
Salim, we're talking about the system and so on. What I'm really concerned about is adult lifelong education, because that sort of is outside the system. Those are the people who have left the system. And there are, for example, 2 billion people in the workforce who are outside of the system. And many of them don't get any education at all. How do we include them in the work we are doing here?
Yeah, just as an example for that one, if, you know, one of the themes that is popping up via the various interviews that we've done, and we'll kind of talk through some of the folks we've interviewed around this, is that we desperately have a need for broad technology access and education access. So for example, when XPRIZE did this Global Learning XPRIZE, the app is free. It's a free Android app that anybody can run. And Zenium, I don't know if you want to talk for a minute or two about that particular project, but that makes it as available as you can get it. We're also counting on satellite internet coming soon, and the number of devices and internet access capabilities are growing exponentially. We've doubled in the last 5 years. We'll double again in the next 5 to 7 years, right? So that enables, just by bringing the bandwidth and device access, you enormously increase the footprint of what's possible. Xenia, do you want to talk about that prize just for a minute?
Yeah, sure. I was just putting something in the chat. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here, Salim. Yeah, we mandated that whatever technology comes out of that prize had to be open sourced. And that prevented a lot of people from participating. And we had a lot of pushback and questions about that from technologists. And part of this was, again, to make this accessible to everyone. And I'm sure we'll touch upon this a little later, but the key ingredient to success here, frankly, was the gamification. Open source, yes, it had to be available to everyone, had to work on an Android device, but more than anything else, gamification is what solved it, what really engaged kids and solved the problem. So, thanks.
Wonderful. So any other questions or comments? And then I want to kick off I'll talk about this, what we're doing today, and kick off that process. Anybody else? Excellent. All right. So the objective for today is, in order to kind of get the quest going and have the right input into it, we wanted to do 2 swarms. And these are 2-3 day events where we cluster around a particular problem, and then come up with a brainstormed answer across a large group of people, which tends to bring in the wisdom of crowds. And we collaborate with our different brains, and we offer prizes for the best ones. The 2 swarms are, one, if we want to pick the future of Latin America, and Latin Leap wants to use the output for transforming education in Latin America, and then transforming Latin America via education, what will Latin America look like? And so what we did was, in this swarm, we want to paint a picture and get some sense of what will Latin America look like over a 10-year period. Okay, what do we think are the major socio-political and economic environment that we're living into that? And we've got a set of speakers who will speak about that. Then we'll go to a broader discussion, and that anybody can post suggestions, ideas. We'll go into kind of a Q&A discussion, brainstorming, and then everybody has 2 days in which to come up with a kind of a 2-page thesis on what could Latin America look like, and what do we think it will look like in a 10-year period. Then next week, we'll do a similar swarm on what do we think education could look like in Latin America. And those 2 will feed into the overall quest kickoff process with those folks. So to kick off, I would like to ask Karina Besprovan, who's Argentinian, part of the EXO community, a mother, and deeply into education, to say a couple of words on what she's seeing in terms of education. Karina, are you there, and can you kick us off?
Hi, how are you, everybody? Okay, I have been going through the education for a long time, and especially as a mother, not as a professional, because I was very curious about how my kids are going to evolve through the system. So I start researching and attending different events. In the last couple of years, 2 years, I attended 14 different events. I was taking notes because Salim asked me, just to understand what people think about, what they are trying to do. And at the end of the day, everybody thinks and agree with some topics, but we didn't see actions out of these webinars of events, as Salim's point out. This is why I was very interested in participating here, because everybody thinks and talks about the same, but it's very difficult to turn that into actions. About what I identified, I am a sociologist. I want to express first, I am not an economist, I am not a technology, I work in the sociology fields. And what I discovered lately is like 3 things, just to say. One is that I worked like 20 years ago in the CEPAL, that is in Spanish is CEPAL, that is the Latin America division for the United Nations, that it's based in Chile. And I wrote my first essay, and it talked about the difference in Latin America, where people are living in the 21st century and people living in the 19th century. And I think that we have this problem now with main cities that are, of course, like Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo and Bogota and Santiago and DF, Ciudad de Mexico. They are cities that the people mostly are living in the 21st century because they have better education and they have access to internet and technology, while at the same time, we have other cities that is 50% or more of the population living in the 19th century. So we have a very huge contrast. And also this contrast speak about languages, access, idiosyncrasy, mindset that nobody think about when they think in countries. So for me, this is the first way of separating, segmentate, and thinking about Latin America. The second aspect for me is don't thinking about the people, the individuals, thinking about the families. And this is what I spoke 3 years ago with the Dean of Education from my son university here in Boston. So I said to him, okay, you are teaching the kids about exponential technologies, you are thinking about the future, you are training them to think about the future, but what happened with the parents? We have a lack and a gap. We don't understand what you are talking about. We don't understand about the system that you are using. So you are creating this gap between adults, me, the parents, and the kids. So we cannot talk the same language we don't understand. In Latin America, this is huge. And what we are seeing is that the families are not the families that we knew in the past. 2 parents and 2 kids. Families are changing in Latin America, and we don't take care about that. In 10 years, the most amount of growth of type of families is going to be mothers with kids alone, only mother with kids. This is the growing amount of type of family. So how are we going to plan to understand this type of family, the needs they are going to have? So I think that this is very important. And the third one and last is, how are we going to bring hope to people in Latin America? This is a very important word that we don't take care about that. We talk about economics, we talk about politics, we talk about social, we talk about technology, but what Latin American people needs is hope. How are we going to bring hope to them into the future? And this is education, this is a home, this is economic, I don't know what it is. But if we don't bring hope, we don't bring future. So these are my 3 topics, Salim.
Thank you, Karina. This is, and I want to just stress something. Karina has been to 14 education conferences trying to figure out what education should be. So if there's somebody that has a good sense of what's happening, this is it. In fact, Karina pointed us to an event happening right now called Incited with Payete from the CEO of Telefonica, with Rafael Nadal, all these folks. And it's one of those great events talking about what the potential is, but how do we actually realize it, right? And that's partly what we're trying to solve is here, is that part. Okay, we're going to kick off one of our first speakers is going to be, I think it's Neil, right? Lars, who we got first?
We can bring up Neil. I'm just checking.
You've also got a question. You've got a question from Luis Enrique.
Oh, Luis Enrique, go ahead.
Right. Salim, hello everybody. I'm Luis Coloma from Latin Leap. Pleasure being here with you. I think that one of the questions we should start raising, it is, what is the definition of education? We're going to have a workshop, an ExO Quest about education, but what do we understand is education, and what should education be in the future? Is the current definition of education what we are seeking, or is it a different definition of education? What is the content, the competencies that children, that adults need to be productive, to be functional, for well-being in the future?
Yeah.
And so I think that we should.
It's one of the key topics we want to address in this quest is what is it, right? Because right now, and for the last few hundred, if you go back 5,000 years, we did education on a one-to-one basis. You had your you were an apprentice to a master. If you're in India, you had a guru. If you were in Germany, you belonged to a guild, and somebody, you had your Greek tutor, etc. Then as we went to the Industrial Revolution, we went to essentially job schooling and training people for trades. And we essentially created a factory system. And when one teacher, many students. And now we have many teachers, many students, right? With online and hybrid models and whatever. And an important question, I think, is exactly that, Luis Enrique. What do we want it to be? And is it? And I think of it as moving from education systems to learning systems, right? The question then becomes, what do you want to learn? I think it goes towards the MTP, but we can explore that. And that's a key question we'll want to answer during this process. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Who did we had a particular order, and what did we agree on the order, Lars? Just so I don't blow this thing.
We want to bring up Neil first, so maybe you want to just give a brief intro to your conversation with Neil, and I'll bring him up.
Yep. Then
we will have just a second. Then we have, I think we want to bring on Hugo Martinez. Who's on this session.
Hugo will come to us live. He's listening in.
Yes.
Now Hugo's going to speak in Spanish, so
yes,
everybody get your AIs ready to understand that and in inverse for this. Okay, let's kick off. So Neil Ferguson is one of the leading historians in the world, kind of at the level of Yuval Harari. Has some deep insights as to the broader dynamics occurring, and you'll hear from him in this talk, which I recorded with him a few days ago. Lars, let's hear from Neil.
Let's hear from Neil. Just before you start wondering, I'm just bringing you into an AI-supported platform, obviously, which is going to be one of the tools we are using throughout this process. So let me bring up Neil. Here we go.
Wonderful. Neil Ferguson, wonderful to be with you. Many of you are familiar with Neil's work as one of the top historians in the world, and has a wonderful sense of the structures and paradigms that are kind of driving the world forward or backward, as it were, in various places. Neil, as we think about the future of Latin America and the socioeconomic environment, wanted to get your sense of, if you could wave a wand and transform three things about Latin America, what would those three things be?
If only there were wands available for this kind of purpose. I'm not, of course, from Latin America, but I'm going to quote Hernando de Soto right off. The first thing my magic wand would do would be to give all those people in Latin America who have no property some property, or at least some rights over the property that they own. That would be number one. The second thing my wand would do would be to give them a much better education than they had, because a huge number of people have failed by the kind of quality of education that's made available to them. So I'd fix economic opportunities, I would fix education, and then I'd try to fix Latin American politics so that there aren't the kind of category errors that crop up again and again. We're facing inequality, therefore let's change the constitution. That's the kind of political category error that has got Latin America into trouble time and time again by changing the rules of politics instead of working within them. So those would be the three waves of the magic wand, and we'd see if it worked.
So property, education, and politics, and let's not change the category type of thing. What do you think the likelihood is of any of those happening over the next, say, 10-year period? Because we're trying to roughly operate on what might Latin America look like in 10 years?
Well, you're probably expecting me to be very pessimistic about the next 10 years, because you can see all kinds of short-term problems. The region has been hit very hard by the pandemic. I think the hardest hit region in the world. There are all kinds of political flashing red lights wherever you look. In some cases, the light's basically gone out, say Venezuela. Yeah. In other cases, it's flashing, looking at Brazil. I could go on. So you're expecting a pessimistic response, but no, because actually, in a very interesting way, new technologies are making possible things that previously were not possible. We see this economically with the extraordinary fintech revolution that is giving people access to the financial system for the first time. Not just young people, but people who previously were excluded. And this is happening all over Latin America at a faster pace than in North America. So I see some sign of the economic problem beginning to be solved. I'm an optimist about the education too, because actually education is the simplest problem we face on this planet today. We know what a good school looks like, and guess what? They don't cost that much to run. So that is fixable too. The politics, that's probably the hard one. I mean, it's hard to be optimistic about Argentina ever kicking its Peronist habit, which it just keeps on rerunning and rerunning as if it's going to have a different result. So I'm a little bit more skeptical that there's going to be a big improvement. But let's not forget, Latin American politics has it a lot. If you look back to when we were kids, I mean, the military coup scenario just doesn't come up that often, except maybe in the New York Times when they don't like the look of a newly elected president. So even from a political point of view, there are grounds for cautious optimism. But on the economics and the education, there are solutions in existence today that even 10 years ago, they didn't exist.
One question I struggle with is the amount of public sector versus private sector education, right? The public education systems are notoriously hard to change. But one huge optimism is the extraordinary explosion of extracurricular opportunities, reskilling opportunities, upskilling opportunities, etc. Does that give you optimism in Latin America?
There are two things that can really help a bad public education system get better. One is actually competition from private education. And the evidence on this is clear. The more of a mixed economy you have in education, everybody does. Competition actually raises standards in the public sector. So that's something that we need to see a little bit more of, but that's not a sufficient solution. I think it's clear that software cannot provide an alternative to education, that distance learning can only be a supplement, but it is an important supplement. Particularly in schools that are not delivering, let's say in a core subject like math, a lot can be learned in terms of math online. I'm not telling you I can teach you the history of Western civilization with a webinar, but I am telling you that there's a lot of reinforcement that wasn't there before that what we call distance learning or online education can provide.
And for the economic opportunities, you make a very valid point. FinTech is really expanding access into the economic system. You see that continuing and pretty much unstoppable. That would be my view. What's your view?
Of course, the incumbents, those banks that have traditionally served Latin America rather poorly, are likely to put up a fight. But if you think of it from the vantage point of politicians, what's not to like about financial inclusion? After all, populists have been saying for decades that they want to help the people who are further down the income distribution. And let's face it, Latin America is still characterized by pretty high inequality in wealth and incomes. FinTech is a fix for that it's hard to hate unless you're an incumbent bank that is going to have its lunch eaten. Even the financial elites can get in behind this if they're smart. They'll be investing in the fintech companies that are going to dominate Latin American finance over the next 10, 20 years. So I do think this is an unstoppable revolution. There will be resistance. There always is. There are always vested interests. But what chance do they have if you're offering literally millions of people access to the financial system? I come back to Hernando Soto. When I first met Hernando, his great lament was the mystery of capital is the poor have capital, but they cannot access it as collateral because they cannot establish even their property rights to it. That's a problem that's getting fixed through technology. Hernando had the insight that blockchain would help there.
Huge. And
it's a big deal that suddenly you can actually give people legal title in Peru in a way that you just couldn't before because the transaction costs were too high. So I think that's a big revolution that I don't see anybody stopping that.
I've been tracking that very carefully, and the challenge comes to when you ask a government not to be authoritative over who owns what land. They go, wait a minute, how would we have corruption if we're not having the final say? And then you run into what I call the immune system problem. What's your view on the future of cryptocurrencies in Latin America? And the dollarization or the moving off the dollar that as they've been attempting in El Salvador and other places that are coming along?
Well, before we talk about the future, let's talk about the present. There's already a very large appetite for monetary and financial experiment in Latin America. And that's not surprising, since the old legacy system has given Latin America more financial crises and inflation crises and banking crises than any other part of the world. So understandably, Venezuelans would love to get their hands on something other than the national currency. Argentinians feel about the same way. Those are the places where inflation's a really serious problem, but everybody knows that it's just around the corner, even if price stability seems to have been achieved in the recent past. So the present is an exceptional willingness to run the experiment. Do I buy the El Salvadorian model? No, I don't, because I don't think the point of Bitcoin is to be a national settlement unit, a national money. Rather, we should think of Bitcoin as an option on digital gold. It's an option on a new financial system in which Bitcoin is the kind of gold-like thing, and Ethereum and all the things that you build on top of it look more like a financial system. I think it's going to work, but it's still, let's face it, at the experimental stage. Ultimately, governments are not going to give up their national fiat currencies. They're too useful a policy tool, and the way they can keep them is by saying you have to pay your taxes in this money. So as long as we have to pay our taxes in some national currency, there'll need to be off-ramps from the crypto world to the real world, and that those off-ramps will be taxed. This is going to work out, as it often does in financial history, through evolution. And in the evolutionary process, you'll see all kinds of disturbing features, bubbles, periodic great dyings. Some things will fail. This is going to be a volatile, bumpy ride. But I have no doubt that we're in the midst of a financial revolution, and that Latin America stands to benefit from that revolution. Because, as I said, the old system that we developed in the later 20th century of fiat currencies, which governments controlled, that system has not served Latin America well at all, and therefore there's nowhere more open to the new experiment than LATAM.
And not by accident are Venezuela and Argentina the most active Bitcoin countries in the world, hedging against the currency inflation and so on. So the two things that really give me hope are your commentary about the financial, the fintech, and how that will inevitably give access. And secondly, that will then lead to more opportunities in education and others for the entire region. So that's very, very fascinating. Neil Ferguson, thank you so much for your time. This has been, as usual, and wonderfully insightful commentary from you. We'll take that into our community and into our group and discuss the future. And when we summarize it, we'll let you know what came out of it.
Thanks, Salim.
Okay. So, there are some key points that Neil makes, right? One, that financial inclusion will broaden access to everything. B, I'm a big believer in Bitcoin over, say, a 20-year period. I think over a 10-year period, governments will stubbornly hold on to their fiat systems because it's the only monetary tool they have left. Any comments or thoughts about what we just heard from Neil, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Any quick observations? Anybody strongly disagree with what he said? Okay, nobody. So I've had some discussions with Hernando de Soto, who's very deep into property rights and giving property rights for the poor. He's got some he tried to create a big project in Honduras to have property titles and land titles layered onto the blockchain. And then, as we mentioned, the government went, wait a minute, how can we not be authoritative over who owns what land? That would be a disaster, and ended the thing. So there's the immune system in full flow. So we have with us live Hugo Martinez. Hugo, are you there, and can you join us?
Yes, I am here.
Hi, Hugo. So Hugo, you're going to speak in Spanish.
Yeah. And
I'm going to preface this with two things. One is Neil Ferguson is very much on the very conservative Hoover Institute, very much on the far libertarian side of the spectrum of politics. Your history is a little bit more on the other side of that. So it's important to get that sense of it. You were the head of SICA, which is the UN for Central American countries, and also foreign minister in El Salvador. Okay. So from your perspective, if you could wave a wand and transform 3 things about Latin America in 10 years, what would those be? And feel free to speak in Spanish. We will figure out how to stumble along.
Ok, bueno, muchas gracias. Yo creo que qué cosas se deben transformar depende también de la visión que tengamos hacia el futuro, ¿no? Y pienso que un aspecto fundamental, como ya se ha conversado, es el tema de la educación o de la formación, que puede ser otro término que podríamos utilizar. Y el asunto es educación o formación ¿para qué? Y esta educación o formación debe de estar en base a un concepto de futuro que tengamos de nuestras sociedades. Por supuesto que si partimos del hecho de que necesitamos unas sociedades más prósperas, más desarrolladas y más inclusivas, tenemos que dirigir la educación en ese sentido. Entonces, para mí, el primer factor es la educación, pero no una educación en abstracto, no una educación con un sistema anquilosado como el que tenemos, sino una educación dinámica. Hasta podríamos hablar de un término un poco atrevido de una revolución en la educación, que no significa tampoco terminar con todo el sistema actual, porque algunas bases educativas debemos tener todos, pero sí significa construir los puentes, las avenidas, los cambios que se deben hacer para las salidas hacia el rol que cada individuo, cada hombre, cada mujer va a jugar en el futuro. Es muy importante tener entonces una visión prospectiva de qué es lo que queremos a 10, a 20, a 30 años y sobre esa base cuáles son las áreas en las cuales debemos poner énfasis en la educación. Entonces, primer punto, la educación. Segundo punto, para mí es fundamental la productividad y la tecnología, porque no se trata hacia una sociedad más próspera, más justa, de repartir lo poco que se tiene, de hacer cada vez más pobres, sino al contrario, se trata de buscar una mayor productividad, un mayor desarrollo, y me parece a mí que una herramienta fundamental es la tecnología, y ese es como el segundo aspecto al cual yo le pondría atención en la región. Cómo invertir, cómo incentivar la productividad y el desarrollo científico y tecnológico en nuestra región en función, evidentemente, pues, del crecimiento económico, de la inclusión social y de una mejor situación para cada uno de los latinoamericanos y latinoamericanas. Entonces, ese es el segundo punto. Para mí, el tercer punto es la inclusión. Estoy de acuerdo con la inclusión financiera, pero yo usaría el término de una manera más amplia. Una inclusión social que nos permita, por ejemplo, tener algún acceso a cobertura social para personas que están totalmente excluidas del sistema. Si tuviéramos un sistema más inclusivo, la pandemia, por ejemplo, hubiera pegado menos fuerte en algunas regiones de Latinoamérica. Y esa es para mí un reto fundamental, cómo lograr una mayor inclusión en nuestras sociedades. Entonces, en breve, 3 cosas: educación, productividad y tecnología e inclusión. Serían las 3 cosas que yo trataría de cambiar en la región.
Hugo, thank you for that. Muchas gracias. Tengo 10 palabras nuevas ahora en español.
Do you want me to do like a summary of what he said, or it's not needed?
That would be great for our European friends and me.
Okay. So what he said is that transformation, it's based basically in a vision. What is the vision that we want to achieve? And why are we talking about education? Education or formation for what? So this is very important to understand why we are talking about education and what we need education for. What is the type of society that we want? And if we understand that and we have this under our control and our goal, this is how we are going to build education. So he talked about 3 aspects. So first, education, and education as a dynamic, see as a dynamic that it's move on every time. And he wants to be disruptive and talk about a revolution in education, not only education that can change, but that can be a revolution. It doesn't mean that we need to get rid of everything, but to build on top of that. So it's a combination. We don't need to start from scratch. We need to build like bridge, and we need to build avenues so our people can take the leap on these avenues and try to understand how they can improve their life into the future. So it's up to every individual just to understand what is their role in society that they want to achieve, and to try to get into an education path for them. And the second point is the productivity and technology, because what he tried to say is we don't need to try to use what we have and to get everybody a share of what we have, but we need to build more about what we have. We need to produce more and to give people more, and we need to use technology just to be more productive. And that is very important to have a development and investment and initiatives to people using the technology avenues. And the third one is inclusion. And what he said that is he agreed with the financial inclusion, but it's not enough. What he wants to see is social inclusion, that it's from a basic level. So if everybody, for instance, during the pandemic was into the system, because we understand that there are many people out of the system, and in Latin America especially, so the pandemic, it was the impact was higher in that people that are out of the system. So what he wants to have is social inclusion, so everybody can have access into the system and we don't leave anybody out.
Got it. I have a question for you, Hugo. If we have most people with a device and satellite internet and with free access to a large number of educational resources, does that deliver some of the social inclusion that you're talking about via access to technology, or do you need more?
Eso da un acceso a inclusión social. Pero está también el acceso a la salud, por ejemplo, ¿no? Que mucha gente, y es lo que decía con la pandemia, mucha gente estaba fuera del sistema de salud y por eso algunos países fueron más golpeados con el tema de la pandemia. Entonces sí, hay una mayor inclusión con la tecnología, pero también debe haber una inclusión mínima, un nuevo pacto social básico que permita incluir a las personas que están totalmente excluidas del sistema en este momento. Alguien puede decir, bueno, no queremos una figura totalmente paternalista que esté gastando todos los recursos que se generan en atender a estas personas excluidas, pero es que la inclusión no solo significa darles acceso a un sistema de salud, sino también darles acceso a pasar de la informalidad que existe en muchos países, en nuestros países hay mucho comercio informal, hacia la formalidad. La formalidad que significa tener los apoyos, los incentivos del Estado, de las instituciones, pero que también significa responsabilidades de contribuir económicamente al desarrollo del país. Entonces sí es un buen paso, una mayor apertura tecnológica y un mayor acceso a la educación, pero no es suficiente. Y un punto adicional es, creo que el tema fundamental ahora mismo es cómo se certifica los conocimientos o la formación que uno recibe. Porque siempre tiene que haber algo que respalde, no necesariamente un título después de 15 años, de 20 años de estudios, pero hay acciones, hay técnicas muy particulares que pueden adquirirse rápidamente y que lo que se necesita es un certificado, algo que diga esta persona es capaz de hacer esta tarea y que tenga un horizonte de tiempo si esa tarea se tiene que ir innovando.
I think I understood half of that. Karina, quick summary.
Yes, Salim, I am on it. Okay, what he said is that, yes, the technology helped, but it's very interesting what he said, because he's talking about moving people from the informal system to the formal system. And in Latin America, you know that in the economic way, we have more than 50% of the population that works without paying taxes or without doing a formal transaction through banking, etc. So the technology is going to help, but he is trying to say that we need a new social pact that it's going to give basic help to the people and to make them believe that are going to be part of the system, because now they are left behind. So this is very important, and it's more social than technology. The technology could help, but it's more a social path. And he's not talking about using a paternalist figure that need to pay and to give everything to the people, but inclusion also means giving responsibilities to the people. So they receive, but they also give. So they are part of the ecosystem. This is very important, and I totally agree. And additional, he spoke in the education area. He added some comment that is very interesting as well, that is, how are we going to certify that the people get rewards in education, or they are getting some formation, new formation in technique aspect. And this is very important for people, because if they, today we have that the most important people are the ones that go to the top ranked universities and they are getting certificates. How are going we to do this in this new future of education system, where probably we need 6 months or 3 months or less amount of time just to convert somebody with a new technique? And this is not very well now documented. So this is another topic that he wants to address.
Excuse me, Salim, one important thing, thank you, Karina. One additional thing that I think that Hugo mentioned is that inclusion is not only related to financial inclusion or educational inclusion, but also health inclusion. If you don't have access to basic health, most of the people are out of the health system in Latin America. If you don't get access to basic health services, it is difficult to be productive and have complete inclusion, social inclusion.
Yeah, I live in the US. I know all about health inclusion or not, etc. So yeah, totally agree. Okay, wonderful. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Julian Ugarte. Are you on, and can you join us live?
I'm in, Salim. Hello,
you are in. Julian, welcome. So for folks that are not aware, Julian ran for Senate in Chile, was one of our Singularity students from GSP 10. So has been operating with an exponential mindset for 10 years now. You can see he looks a little bit crazy. Julian, give us your thinking, because you've been operating social programs on the ground in multiple Latin American countries for years. So give us a minute on what Social Lab is doing. And secondly, if you could wave a wand and transform 3 things about Latin America, what would they be?
Okay, thank you, Salim. So what I'm doing the last 10 years, I create Social Lab, which is our open innovation platform to support with finance and incubation and accelerating model to the social entrepreneurs who can solve some social problem in our countries with a business model, to make that solution more scalable, and in that way we think that we can impact millions of people, and we are doing that also. So we are happy on that. But I see many challenges in Latin America, probably more than 2 years before, after the pandemic, related with many stuff. And I will try to put the glass of the education to speak about the problems. I think we have two types of persons in Latin America. The ones who can go to high school and universities, and they have access to probably all the knowledge that we have in the world. And they are not enough in one side, so we need to expand that amount of people. And at the same time, the paradigm of success of the professionals are not probably the right paradigm that we need to support in these times. The guy who goes to high schools, they probably in Harvard is the same. They want to win money, and they want to be hired by a big company, and they are not only taking care about the challenges that we have. So job market in Latin America are not related with our problems. That's one thing. Companies are trying to make more money, and many times they do not the right stuff. For example, they make collusions to increase the price of basic services, even in Chile. So you have more poor people, the owners of the company will get more money, but that's not the way to overcome our problems. And we have many problems: global warming, increasing poverty, and I don't know if companies or private sector sometimes are part of the problem, not part of the solution. So the job market are not taking care of our problem. That's one thing. Then democracy is not taking care of the problems. What we are looking now, it's a kind of soccer teams trying to go to the power in the different countries. And they are fighting between them, and you will have a half of the population with the red team and the other half of the population with the black team. One will win, and you will have a half of the population angry, a half of the population happy. And we will not solve our problems on that way. We need, for the first time in our history, to collaborate to solve our problems. But companies are more worried about the EBITDA, and democracy and politics are more taking care about who will win the next election. So we have a structural problem. So how education can help to solve that? In one part, I think we need to change for the guys who has the lucky to go to universities and has access to knowledge, finance, to change a little bit the paradigm of success. We need to innovate to combat climate change. We need to overcome poverty, and will not happen in the traditional spaces. So that's one thing. So we need to move the job market to that place, and I think that entrepreneurship probably is the faster way to make it. And then you have the other part of the countries, in all the countries that they don't have access to education. For example, in a country like Chile, we are in problems now, but we used to be the last 10 or 20 years probably the most success country in Latin America. We have a 18 million people population, and 5 million people doesn't finish the high school. So a half of the population in Chile doesn't complete the high school. So and not only that, these guys don't complete that because they don't have health. They need to go to jobs to have the money for it. Probably they don't have access to regular services like water, internet, health. So the basic stuff to be a student are not covered. So if you have internet, or if you have augmented reality, is not enough if you need to eat, for example. Because in the Maslow pyramid, that's first. And education probably it's still be not the first need. And that's a huge problem. And for me, there are two stuffs. Education and poverty should be, it's more complex. It's more complex. For example, you have poor guys studying with poor guys and rich guys studying with rich guys. You have two countries, not collaboration. The guys with the opportunities doesn't see the needs of the guys who has not opportunities. So we need to include that. We need to create relations. I think the problems that we have in Latin America now, and probably in the US, is the same. It's about relations. We don't have trust. We are trying to solve our lives and our families, but we don't take care about the other. The same happens with the business, and the same happens in democracy. So for what? Study for what? I think for make a better world, but we have just democracy, which is not doing and telling us that, not education, and we don't have religion. Probably I don't like religion, but religion used to do that. So I think the huge problem is an ethical problem. We have an ethical problem in Latin America. And then we have our real problems. And our real problems, we can solve it with innovation. We have all the tools, all the technologies, but leaders are thinking in themselves, not in our common needs. And I think the education should be focused in our needs, in our common needs, in what we need to solve this decade, which is almost impossible. And if you don't take less water, if I don't take less water, if the guy the business who are growing pigs don't take less water per kilogram, we will have a problem. And we need to join again. And I think education probably should do that. It's not only about mathematics. It's not only about physics. It's also about love. And in any country, teach about love. And I think we have an ethical problem, not only super particular problems. And I think entrepreneurship and innovation should help to broaden that.
Right. Okay. So you believe there's a major ethical issue that has to be solved. Let me ask you one quick question. If you were going to divide Latin America into 3 buckets, okay? Because one of the enormous challenges for this group is the incredible diversity of economic opportunity, natural resources, size of country, population, language, percentage of indigenous people, etc. What would be the dividing lines for you to classify the 3 buckets into all the countries in Latin America into 3 buckets? Mine would be Brazil as one bucket, the big Latin American countries in another bucket, and the small countries in a 3rd bucket. That would be mine. What would yours be?
Yeah, I think Brazil is one for language and many stuff. Then I think South America can be one, from Mexico to the down, like Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia. Even Mexico can be a little bit similar. Then Bolivia, Peru can be part of that. And then Central America, Caribbean, I think it's other stuff. Lower population, but more poverty. I think we have a structure in Brazil and Latin America to start growing from now. And probably in Central and Caribbean, we need to have more efforts.
Got it. Okay. So Julian, thank you. And we will figure out a way of partnering with Social Lab as we progress this quest along. Okay. And thank you for being with us. Separately, I'm going to post a link to a 35-second video of Julian in another session. But that'll be more for late night with alcohol type of thing. Okay. I don't know if Diane Francis is on. Diane, if you're on, I would love if you would hop on and say a couple of things. Diane, are you there? And do you feel like saying a couple of things?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
I can. First of all, thank you for being with us on very, very short notice. I wanted to ask you a specific question because you are one of the top journalists in Canada and frankly, globally. You talk a lot about corruption, and it's kind of the elephant in the room for this type of a discussion. In a 10-year period, what do you see are the 2 or 3 biggest issues in Latin America from your perspective as an investigative journalist?
Well, I see corruption as the disease due to an underlying problem, one major underlying problem, which I think is the patriarchy, the patriarchal nature of the Latin culture. And that derives, of course, from the Catholic religion and history and so on and so forth, and the colonization. And so that has, and the disease that flows from that is corruption, because by definition, it's elitist and not inclusive. And so you can have a democracy in name only, but it really doesn't change things very much. And that's your immune system. So what I'm saying is that there's a basic DNA problem that can be addressed and can be hopefully medicated or genetically altered, whatever you want to say. But I think that I have a couple of ideas that I think might be interesting. Education is absolutely critical, of course, in all of this. And my definition of the goal of education is to merely learn how to learn. The role of a school is to teach you how to learn. What you learn is up to you. What you learn is not anybody's business, but having the tools to read, to numerate, to maybe cognitively, logically put together argument, that kind of thing, I think is the goal of an education system. Other than that, I think it should be completely agnostic. And that's where a lot of societies get into trouble. But what I was going to say is that the patriarchy and the elitist nature of the Latin cultures, and they're all very different cultures, and some are different, it's a matter of degree, but I think it's existent throughout that. And by the way, patriarchy exists in the European cultures and in the American cultures too, whether people want to admit it or not, and elitism, but it's very pervasive there, and it's very damaging. And, you know, it ranges from the legacies, the very wealthy landowners, the rich industrialists who've been able to benefit from the inequality, inequality of opportunity in the system, learn how to game the system for themselves, all the way to what I call the nouveau riche elite, which are the gangsters that run the Northern Triangle countries, the gangsters that are increasingly running Mexico and in other parts. So these are also patriarchal and very elitist, and they come from different areas, different educational levels, and with different histories. But my magic wand is educate the girls, educate the little girls of Latin America. That should be a priority. That should be an absolute priority. Change the women of a culture, you change the culture itself. You change the people, the matriarchy that has control over family decisions, over community decisions, over religious choices, and that sort of thing. And there's also a very obvious link between the educational level of the female in a culture and the birth rates.
Yeah.
Birth rates go down, poverty goes down with it, of course, fewer mouths to feed, and opportunities go up for those that do get born. Yes. And this has been the phenomenon that's driven Asia's miracles. Unlike Latin America, the Asians have educated their females to a great extent, China being the leader of the leaders. So the educate the females, I think, is a priority. I think universal access and or distribution of tech infrastructure to all. I mean, it'd be great if Bill Gates bought a cell phone for everybody, every kid in every school in Latin America, and there was universal broadband access, because once they have the tools to read and numerate, give them the device, they'll figure out stuff. I really believe that. The next thing is universal access to education, of course, for everybody, male and female, and health services. As another speaker said, you know, you can't work if you're not healthy. You can't produce, you can't create wealth if you're not healthy. And then of course, the disease gets it, then the disease can be properly attacked. If people have devices, if people can be linked, if people are educated, if people can read other ideas, and if people feel somewhat empowered and confident that they're not always going to be on the low end of the scale, then you can get democracies forming, you can get social movements happening, you can get unions happening, you can get a lot of the countervails to the elites and the patriarchy forming that will make the society more egalitarian and hopefully more productive. And that can also lead to the most important thing is the rule of law and privatization and property rights. Property rights don't exist in Latin America because the rule of law doesn't. It exists, but it's flawed. And so those are the things, those are my three, those are my magic wands. And I think it's also important though, interestingly, and this isn't a paradox, I haven't figured this out, but if you look at all the global polling on something called happiness, the Latin Americans are the happiest people on the planet. So they're doing something right. And I think a lot of it has to do with the strong family and the strong sense of love and happiness and that sort of thing that does characterize the Latin American cultures more than the others.
Wonderful. Diane Francis, thank you so much for the commentary. Would love to get your thoughts about education next week when we delve into that. I'm going to paste a link into the chat of one of Diane's columns called Trashganistan. Diane has an incredibly wonderful way of writing. Every week she puts out a few thoughts that for me are a must read on global affairs, everything from Putin to the Texas issue, etc. And one of my favorite writers everywhere. I'm just going to give a quick anecdote. We did our first fast track sprint in Medellin, and you came a day early, and everybody said, "Oh, what'd you do?" And you spent the day walking through the slums of Medellin, and the shocked look of all the people around the table that you would have the gumption to do that. They went, "I've never been to the slums of Medellin." So thank you, Diane, for being with us. We have next, the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a quick viewpoint from Fabio Barbarossa, who's one of the top industrialists and businessmen in Brazil. And he's deeply involved in education, is on the board of several universities. Let's hear from Fabio. Okay, Fabio Barbarossa, welcome and thank you for being with us. I'll ask you the same question we've been asking other participants, which is if you could wave a wand and transform 3 things about Latin America over a 10-year period, what would those be?
I think in Latin America, we hesitated too much focusing in education as much as we could have. I think in many countries you have many good initiatives, but we were never able to give everybody the equal opportunity. And as I like to say, the unequal distribution of income that we have in Latin America, which is around the worst in the world, is just a natural consequence of the unequal distribution of education. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I think we have hesitated too much and have too many changes in government politics. And therefore, we do not have any continuity in terms of the policies. It changed very rapidly, it changed too radically from one extreme to the other. And so we never were able to test a certain tendency and have it introduced. And especially, in my opinion, also, we have gone too much, in my opinion, in terms of government intervention and so on, which is good in terms of solving some immediate problems, but is not good in terms of building a society which can rely on itself. And number 3, I think that we stayed a little bit outside, not too much outside of the global integration. So while we see many organizations integrated in Europe and the United States and agreements being made, Latin America was never a player which decided to sit and play in equal terms, given all the difference, of course, and discuss, of course, the trade agreements and many other agreements which would make an insertion of the Latin American economy much more viable.
Wonderful. That's very concise. So number 1 is equal playing field in education. Number 2 is government consistency, say. Because
political stability, let's say, political stability.
Political stability, because we've been going, I remember talking to Bill Clinton once, and he said, you do something, and then 6 years later, you see the results. You know, and if you keep going like this, you know, you don't have consistency. And the third one is integration into the global economy and really Latin America taking a proper seat at the table globally. I think those are all very powerful commentaries. When you think about all of the countries in Latin America, how would you divide them if you had to divide them into 3 groups? What would those dividing lines be? Economics, culturally, language, how would you think about that?
Well, of course, I'm Brazilian. So the first thing that I think Brazil was never as much integrated as it should have. Of course, given all the boundaries and having in consideration that we are much closer to Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and the other borders like Bolivia and Peru and Colombia and Venezuela, they are sort of far away and we have the forest in between, so there was never too much integration. It's not an easy question for me to go through, but I would say that some countries, especially on the southern cone, invested a lot in education. You can talk about Chile, you can talk about Uruguay, you talk about Argentina, and I think they have been ahead of the game in many senses. So that was positive. And if you go to Latin America and talk about Costa Rica and some others in Central America, which is also being done a good job. Now, the second, I would say, is a group of countries which are catching up on that. And then we see Peru, we see Colombia, we see Brazil, we see Mexico. And I think we are all moving and saying, listen, that's the way to go. And of course, that was my first comment, we are not providing equal education equal access to education, so we have all the natural consequence of that. But these countries are addressing it. And then I see on the other side, I mean, that's my perception from here, and in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, especially the countries which are close, which are not exactly in that same tendency to say, listen, we have to work on education. We cannot continue to blame other countries for all our problems we have. Many problems we may have been created by other countries, but the fact is that the solution lies with us. And I think these countries are going too much and criticizing and getting isolated and not investing properly in education, which is the only way for us to get integrated into the world, which is getting more and more globalized.
One last quick question specifically about education would be, you know, there's three kind of spectrum of having it done by government. So the other extreme is private sector, or the government enables certain private sector initiatives and lets it go. For Latin America to transform education, would you prefer to see it on the government side or on the private sector side or somewhere in the middle?
I would say somewhere in the middle, but I'll qualify it a little. I think for the basic education, I mean, only government can solve the problem. I'm very much involved in education. I'm very glad to be part of the group, which is also discussing education and so on. Yeah. But the dimensions of it, and talking about Brazil, but in relative terms, for every country is the same, is something that only government can solve. And we're talking about millions of students in case of Brazil. The state of São Paulo alone is 5,000 schools, 4 million students. So it has to be with the government. Giving a basic access to education, and then to develop and go into a system which gives people, the students, it's not to form them, to prepare them, it's to develop them, which is not the same thing. It's to make sure that each one gets its best and develops and go throughout life with their abilities, their talents, and so on. But then the universities is something that could be mixed. Of course, you can have mixed everywhere, but universities can be mixed. But talking about in Brazil in particular, we have a very cruel system because the universities are free. You don't pay for them, the best ones, but you pay on the basic. So what will happen is that the people which are in the good schools, they go to the public universities and get the best formation. So that only perpetuates people that had a good basic education. Of course, they go to the best universities, which happen to be public. So I say we have to reverse that in the case of Brazil, but make sure they have full access, broad access of quality education to everybody. And that only government can do. So I would say government has a very important role to play.
Wonderful. Fabio Barbarossa, thank you so much for very insightful and concise views on the future of Latin America and education itself. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me for this. My pleasure.
So you heard there the commentary now from a Brazilian. We're going to have one last talk from Jose Antonio Rios, who's was the Minister of Education in Ecuador. So he's speaking to us from Quito, and he gave us his perspective so that we get a good perspective across big countries, small countries, Caribbean, Hugo from El Salvador and representing Central America overall. So that gives us a good, so this will be our last full talk. Let's hear from Jose Antonio, and then we'll move to a discussion of the various topics. Jose Antonio.
No, Mauricio Pozo was the former minister. Jose Antonio he's in Telco. So.
Oh, sorry, totally got it wrong. Yes, I apologize. We're going to play Mauricio next. Actually, you know what? Let's play Mauricio first, Lars. That way it's Minister of Ecuador, and then we'll go to Jose Antonio. That way, I only got the name wrong. Mauricio, so you've been the Minister of Economics in Ecuador twice, and you've been involved with education at a dean level and quite a few projects around the transformation of education. When we think about the future of Latin America, both from an economic and political and social perspective, if you could change three things and wave a wand, what three things would you transform about Latin America?
If you see the future for Latin America, according to my view, and the three main things that need a change, I would say, first, the access of technology. How can you bring to the people a bigger level of how to access to the technology? I would say it's very important. The young people are thinking in that, or they're moving in that. I would say they react different than we react some years ago. That is one thing. The other that is in some way linked with the first one is the education. My point of view is that the emphasis for the majority of the countries, Ecuador is not the exception, is in the primary school. Because if you put your efforts at the end of the secondary level, or maybe in the university, it's important both, yes, but I think it's more important in the primary level, because it's in that level where you have the roots strong enough to support what you can develop in the secondary level and in the university level. So that is where you can, for example, teach that everybody needs to speak at least 2 languages.
Right.
There's the level where the kids are very, I would say, very awake to learn very, very soon. The kids, they have the facility to learn a new language very soon, to intervene in the technology very fast. It's not the same as an old people or an old person can understand this changing of the world. So the emphasis in the primary school, I think it is very important. This is the second area that I would say. And the third one is that in some way, maybe in Ecuador, in some proportion, maybe different in other countries, but I would say that maybe it's something common, is that the majority of the society, the big portion of the society, they think that the country where they are living is the same as how the world is moving. I mean, I think that it's very important to open the mind to different cultures, to different societies, to other parts of the world, to understand why the world is moving in one way or another, to have the capacity to adapt new things to the society. And I think that this openness of the mind, this openness of how to educate the people, in the sense that Ecuador is a very small country, represent 1 per 1,000 in terms of the GDP in the global terms. It's a very small one, and therefore we are not going to change the world. What we need is to see the opportunities, to use the opportunities in international levels to have a benefit for the Ecuadorians in this case. And therefore, these, I would say, 3 elements, I would say are very important. Maybe they are not the only ones, but I think they are very important in order to have a better future for Latin America.
So access to technology, primary education, and a more global view of other cultures, etc.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Many thanks for your insights. Mauricio Pozo, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Any moment I am open to talk with you again. Okay.
All right. So there we have the view from an actual Minister of Education who has to deal with the challenges of a public education system and deal with all of the chaos that comes with that. I remember talking to a few different ministers of education, Thailand and a few other countries, and every single one of them goes a bit crazy after the experience, juggling priorities, etc. We also heard from Fabio about how important the public education side is because of the large numbers of kids involved, and we need to be dealing with that. Okay, so our last formal speaker that we'll just hear from and then go to a discussion is Jose Antonio Rios, who is with the Cisneros group, chairman of Millicom. And I mentioned to Jose Antonio that the only Venezuelan I knew well was Adriana Cisneros, who's here in Miami. And he said, she's my goddaughter. so the connections are very, I think there's only 5,000 people in Latin America, as far as I can see. Let's hear from Jose Antonio, and then we'll open it up to a broader discussion across all of these speakers. Jose Antonio Rios, thank you very much for being with us. You have a very broad set of experiences across business in many countries. From a businessman's perspective, we wanted to ask you, when you look at Latin America and the future, if you could wave a wand and transform 3 things about Latin America, what would those 3 things be?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Salim. And I'm not sure that in a few minutes you can really talk about what the diversity is in Latin America and the opportunities are. But obviously, some of the things that really give us a great illusion of the future and also concern us. I mean, one of them is how young people are. And I think this is a fantastic situation that not everyone has. What if we could really get to educate those people and train them and really get them to think in a different way and in a more unified way as in Latin America, because Latin America is like a big umbrella name that we have, the same that Asia or Africa. I mean, you know, underneath there is an incredible amount of different countries with different situations, as you pointed out. But what is it that we could do for that? And I would say the biggest thing that we could do is to try to bring the best and the most updated education and values, you know, to every single young person that is studying today there. You know, obviously, our continent has incredible differences, as you said. I mean, I had the opportunity, as my wife said, you know, we've been over 200 times in each one of the top 15 Latin American countries. You know, so in 200 times you can learn a little bit every time that you go. So when you multiply by 200, I guess it's a lot. But there's huge disparity between the different countries, including in the educational setting, because in the southern part of South America, to just take it geographically, you traditionally have had a higher level of formal education for people than what you had in some countries in Central America, or the Caribbean, or in the northern part of Latin America. So they feel in a way that they're different. In reality, for example, when we all land in this great integrating country that is the United States, in spite of its problems, we find that we are, you know, pretty much the same, and that you can't really say that Argentinians do better than Nicaraguans or do better than Colombia. No, it's more up to the individual and what you can do and what you can get and where do you go. And some of that depends not only on your formal education, but what kind of experiences and you have lived through in your life that will allow you to continue to do that. So one of the things will be to educate the young people that are there. There are plenty, and I think this is a huge opportunity for the next 50 years. The second one is to eliminate some of the barriers that we have. The barriers that we have are not just physical or lack of resources. I think we have an overabundance of resources in certain areas compared to other parts of the world. And I'm not just talking about minerals and oil, but you're talking about water and air and then a number of really basic things that are going to go more scarce in the future. So having those resources, how do you use those resources in a healthy way, in a real interesting way to help educate and train all those young people, rather than go into the stealing practices that we've had, the huge corruption that we have had over time, and all the differences that we have as countries. Now, no country is perfect, but we certainly have a huge ways to go forward and to attain a lot less levels of using people's money, I mean, for our own benefit individually. If we can do that and raise that average of improvement over a continent, I think that will be very interesting. I think the third thing would be how to integrate Latin America and integrate Latin America to the rest of the world. Because when you really look at Latin America, we are not that integrated. And even if you exclude the language and cultural differences with Brazil, and you take all the so-called Hispanic countries, there is not that much of an integration in the past. And I think that it's beginning now. You can see that in business. There's a lot more business that are based in the region now. There's a lot of LATAM companies that are growing, but I think there could be a lot more. So what is the purpose of that? Well, to make the countries really interact and benefit from the good things from one to the other. So I think in a very general term, those would be three of the things that I would really love to see in the next 20, 30 years.
So number one, opportunity via education. Number two, a more equitable sharing of resources.
Yeah.
And number three would be a better integration of Latin America with other parts of the world.
Yeah, to become more at par.
Yeah.
With the rest of the world that is increasingly, getting themselves together in a variety of associations that some of them are beneficial, most of them are beneficial, but that in the end in Latin America we have not.
Interesting. Excellent. Well, we'll take this to the group, and this, I think, will add a huge amount of value to the other discussions that we've had. Jose Antonio, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Salim.
Okay, so we heard from a pretty decent dream there. I think we heard a couple of times the need to integrate Latin America with the rest of the world a little more connectedly. And I think we also heard some strong themes about opportunities in both education, technology, economic, and social inclusion. If you've noticed in the chat, Jerry Mikulski has been taking copious notes. Jerry's kind of our wise elder from the side. If you remember, he's famous for saying scarcity equals abundance minus trust. And so has been in our ExO World events a few times. I think this is a good time to kick off a broader discussion amongst the people here as to what do we think are the main themes and what are the drivers that will form a picture for a 10-year view in Latin America. Anybody want to kick off and say a few things?
Salim, I'm happy to start this off and take us in a bit.
Jerry, you've been kind of taking notes and putting all these ideas in your brain, your online brain, and so give us some feedback and some summary.
Yeah, exactly. And our conversation here is pretty white and male, and so I think that Diane and others have done a really good job of pointing that out, and we need to, I think, move into that space. Also, we have a nice beginnings of a really interesting chat going in the Zoom chat, and I'm really interested in sort of helping represent the pieces that are out at the fringe. In the ExO process, the sprint process, there's the notion of core and edge. And usually in the ExO sprints, the sprints are divided into core and edge teams. The core teams are busy trying to improve the core business. The edge teams are busy trying to put the core business out of business with some other radical kind of thing. And for education, I'm far more interested in the edge, so to speak, than in the core, partly because the bureaucracies of education are so well entrenched, but partly also because, as Maria and others were saying in the chat, I see education as partly a mainstreaming and limiting and agency removing mechanism across the world, not just Latin America, but the formal educational systems were copied from basically Germany, Bismarck's Germany. Bismarck had some military schools created. American educators imported the military model to America, pasted it on a highly functional and distributed educational system that was like raising smart citizens who knew how to be involved. And now we have mere consumers. So the educational system, I got radicalized on this, and I did a TEDx talk in 2012. I just put in the chat about all of this kind of stuff. So I'm kind of trying to be an insurrectionist in the crowd here a little bit and provoke other kinds of discussions. And it's not that I don't believe that the core system can't be reformed. I think it can in really interesting ways, but boy, is it well entrenched. And boy, does it serve the patriarchy, the standing systems and authorities, the legacy institutions. It serves them really well. It's actually doing its job really well. So we complain a lot about educational systems, but they're doing their job. It's just that they were designed in some sense to not create an intelligent population of citizens. And at this point, my whole 30 years history goes back to my realizing that the word consumer has eaten our lives entirely. We're being treated as consumers instead of as citizens. And consumers have given up their agency. Their job is to buy more stuff. And our educational system is training us to be good consumers and good sort of workers to be cogs in the system. So that's a little bit radical, but I want to see what other kinds of ideas people want to throw into the conversation. We are really early in the conversation here, and would love to see, there's plenty of conversation about the interwoven, mutually kind of dysfunctional, mutually reinforcing systems of lack of housing, lack of good food systems, lack of healthcare that actually covers people, that make it really hard to learn. Totally interesting, and they really expand the scope of our conversations here. So maybe we have some ways to go there. Xenia, please.
Hi, Jerry. Hi, everyone. Again, great insights. Thanks so much, Salim, for inviting me. So I would just want to piggyback on what you just said about the edge play here, because I think that's what everybody here is here to think about. So given that, I definitely don't agree with a couple of the last speakers. So I don't agree with Fabio and the minister as well about how government needs to be central to the transformation of education. I think that is exactly what will kill it. What the role of government should be is in regulating some of this. However, it's really up to the private sector to transform education, especially going into this new age where we want to include access to education through technology. You want to talk about a more integrated world and a lens into the bigger and outside world as well, then it's got to come from the private sector. And I love the point I think that Jose just made about the natural resources that are on the continent, and how, again, with a slightly different privatized approach to education, Latin America can actually emerge as some of the leaders in new fields like climate tech. And so anyway, I just wanted to say I'm interested in talking about and hearing about some of these edge plays, and government cannot be central to that. Thanks.
Awesome, Xenia, thank you. Are there some favorite edge plays you've heard through your involvement in visioneering and all of the X Prize activities that you just like are those neurons being woken up in your brain right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, all of those edge plays are at the confluence of different kinds of exponential technologies and trends. So, you know, you can go down the list of tech, but really AI platforms are going to be critical to that. Also, new ways of immersion and learning, especially when you're talking about an insulated population. And that is going to be, you know, with VR and AR as those price points start plummeting, and access, of course, to you know, 5G or even 4G in some places is going to be more ubiquitous.
Thank you. Karina.
Thank you, Sherry. Just a thought about what you said, and the last lady also said. I was thinking about always the government, they think that the private need to do the job, and the private thinks that the government needs to do the job. So it's every time accusing the other part of having that done. But nobody is thinking about the third party here. So what if in 20 years, it's the definition of the education of the future, of learning of the future, or whatever revolution comes, I feel that it's going to come from a third party, not from the ones that are competing now, because they are not complementing, but they are competing. Only that I want to leave. Pedro is also wanted to want to talk. So this is a thought that it came to me that I wanted to share. Sherry, thank you.
Gracias, Karina. Pedro.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. Just a thought here, and it's actually a question because I really don't know the answer. I think that we, as was discussed before, we talk a lot about sectors, right, and the industry and the government. And one of the elements of education for me that is most relevant is the student or the individual. And what I've seen in the last 18 months is a very interesting shift of the paradigm, where I see now a lot of people being empowered by education, and I see a lot of parents working with their children. And I think that is very exciting. And it takes me to the question about the skills needed in order to get education. I've been curious about education, I guess, most of my life. And I think that there are two different layers of education, one of them being the skills that we train in business schools or engineering schools, but the other one that has to do more with the natural cognitive capacity of just being curious and learning something new. And I see that with my kids. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and just looking at them trying to figure out how the world works is so exciting. And I would say, for me, that is the foundation of doing all those fantastic skills about, I don't know, nanotech or figuring out how space works. And I believe that most of the discussions in the education space have to do with hard skills and very specific stuff in advanced stages. And I think we need to take a step back and figure out how to fire this thing that Stephen Coulter talks so much about, this curiosity that'll drive the purpose and the passion, and then learning more, and then figuring things out, and creating this kind of virtuous cycle, you know?
Thank you very much, Pedro. My own take on this is that children are born really curious. You just have to look at any 5-year-old, and then we manage to stamp it out of them through socialization, through institutional formalities, through whatever else, by telling them, nope, you can't ask those questions, or whatever else. So how do we preserve and protect this curiosity, right? I think is a key thing. In the chat, Eric and Natalia are talking about differentiation across the countries that make up Latin America. Do either of you want to jump in and just sort of riff on that and say, is there a subcategory? It would be nice to not be talking about 33 countries. If you include the Caribbean, there's 33 countries across the whole thing, 19 if you do Central and South America. So there's a bunch of countries, and they're really, really different, as has been pointed out. Would either of you like to riff on all of this?
¿Qué tal? En español, ¿puede ser? ¿Se escucha?
Sí, te escuchamos bien.
Bien, perfecto. Sí, en realidad era como invitar a reflexionar al respecto. Yo creo que si bien los países latinoamericanos tienen diferentes características respecto de la calidad educativa y del enfoque que tiene la educación en cada uno, asimismo, como en su momento mencionó Karina, dentro de cada país los centros urbanos de mayor relevancia también tienen características diferenciadas respecto del interior de los países. Bueno, es algo muy notorio principalmente en Argentina y considero que también en Chile, pero es más una pregunta que un aporte, ¿no? Respecto de si realmente es ese foco, porque lo pienso, por ejemplo, yo estoy en Argentina, y acá pasa que en la capital del país hay muchísimas más oportunidades en la educación. Ahora eso se está de a poco minimizando, pero hubo un momento en el que si vos querías estudiar te tenías que ir a Buenos Aires, no había alternativa. Ahora de a poco se está haciendo foco en distribuir las oportunidades educativas a lo largo del país, pero lo que me pregunto es, así mismo en Buenos Aires, por ejemplo, no todos acceden a esa educación a la que gran parte de la población accede. ¿Se entiende lo que digo? La localización física de la oportunidad está en Buenos Aires, pero eso no quita que quienes acceden a esa oportunidad provienen de diferentes localidades, más por una posición económica que por una cuestión de localización. E incluso quienes están en Buenos Aires no acceden muchas veces a esa oportunidad educativa porque no tienen la oportunidad por su situación económica o algún otro motivo. Entonces, un poco lo que me planteaba o trataba de debatir tiene que ver con eso, con que más allá de la ubicación geográfica, yo creo que es más una cuestión de clases o demográfica, o habría que debatir a ver cómo hacer esa segmentación, pero no sé si geográfica, lo pongo para compartir.
Gracias, Natalia. A piece of what Natalia just said is about, in Argentina specifically, how if you want to get educated, you kind of have to go to the capital. And this may be a pattern that's common across many countries as well. Karina, would you like to take a swing at translating some of this back into the room and for English speakers only?
Yes, but you did a great job, Jerry. What she was trying to say is that in the past, especially when we didn't have internet, of course, in Latin America especially, and I think in other countries as well, the main cities were the center of education. So everybody traveled to learn, especially the university in the main cities, because they didn't have access. During the time, the last 30 years, and 20 years and 10 years, depending on the country, you got new education institutions in many cities. But on top of that, you also have the access gained through the internet and virtual education. So what she's saying is it's not only depend on where you are located specifically because of the access, because today if you have good internet, you can get classes from the MIT as well, living where she lives. She lives in the southern part of Latin America, Natalia, she's in the south. But on the other hand, people living in Buenos Aires, that it's the main city, also, as the person from the social lab mentioned, the poor goes with the poor and the rich go with the rich. So it's about segmentation regarding to economics on top of where you live. So there is another layer about how we can divide and segment the access of education, not only geographical, but also economic, from the economic point of view.
Thank you so much. We're getting near the end of this session. I just wanted to take Luis Enrique's question or comments. Jump on in.
Thank you. I believe that one thing that is important to stress out is that, as mentioned, Latin America is not a homogeneous area. There is a first world Latin America and a third world Latin America. And there's a lot of differences within countries. So it will be hard to have a one-size-fits-all solution. The private educational system is pretty much at the international level, I will say, even in terms of mid-school and low school, primary school, probably better than in many areas of the US. The problem is the state-run educational system that has been tied to political structures. There's a permanent fight in Latin America and in most of the countries between the conservative, rich elites and the elites that don't have economic power but have political power. And usually the elites that have political power, their tool, their vehicle to advance is having the educational system tied up. You know, they control the educational system. So the economic elites fight against the political elites, or the political elites mainly, that they control the educational system. So understanding this power struggle is important, because to change the state-controlled educational system will have a lot of resistance, a lot of antibodies generated. So I think we have to involve the state in a new way, in an innovative way, because the state, as a government, has actually little control of the educational systems that are very much controlled and tied up by political movements. A lot of those political movements are related to old school socialist way of thinking, paradigms of the 1950s, 40s socialist movements. So I would like to stress this out, because you have two realities: the private sector that is moving according to international standards, and the national educational systems that are more political controlled, that actually controlled by the state.
Thank you, Enrique. Back to you, Salim.
Wonderful. I'm wondering, Laura, or anybody from Latin Leap, if you want to say a couple of words about today. If not, I'll kind of generally wrap up and give a bit of direction to the Swarm participants as to how to think about this and where we go from here.
Yeah, I certainly do want to say a couple of words. Thank you so much, Salim, and thank you everyone for participating up to today. So I think it has been highly enlightening and inspiring for us so far. I think we were just very grateful for all of your participation. We're learning a lot, taking a lot of notes, and are basically just very happy that this has been kicked off, and hopefully can keep collaborating and bringing a vision of education improvement, learning improvement in Latin America to life very soon. Thank you so much from my side.
You're in mute, Salim. But before you...
Sorry. Thank you, Stefan. I was naturally muted. Once in a while I have this total brain freeze around how the AV works, and then we all get in a mess. Stefan, thank you for giving that thought. Stefan is Laura's main partner on Latin Leap, along with Marcelo and a few others that are driving this process. Laura, do you want to say a few words about today, and then we'll...
But more than about today, because I agree with Stefan, we're very happy that this is Kickoff. Just one thing that you have heard me like crazy said, and you know that it's important for me to put out there, and someone mentioned it also in the chat, and it's thinking about mindset. I want us to leave this also, and it has to do with the question that Luis Enrique said, and it's why are we educating for, if that's the word that we're going to choose. And the thing about mindset, just want to leave you with this thing. If you remember when we had the PISA, las pruebas PISA in Latin America, and we did awfully wrong, like awful. And McKinsey decided to do this study about what was happening in Latin America, why we were failing so massively with education, with the education system. And they, after just thinking about the usual suspects, is it curriculum, is it teachers, is it social economic conditions, is it food, what is it? Someone very smart in the room just stand up and said, we have to see the outliers, because we have been seeing that most of them did wrong, but some of them did greatly. What differentiate these two groups? If they have the same curriculum, the same class, the same teachers, they are in the same, they have exactly the same variables. What makes one outstand from the other hundreds? And it turns out that the sole variable that was worth the most was mindset. And I think this is something that we have to have into account, because Latin America is very different, is very heterogeneous, but we tend to have this kind of mindset of blaming, it's of just doing the same patterns. So changing our narrative is something that we should attend through education. And changing that narrative has a lot to do with, we are capable, we can change the world as a region, we can be an example, we can change things from the way that have been for centuries, because the same families have been controlling. Each of our countries have been controlled by mainly the same 10, 15 families from the Conquista time to now. So just to empower people enough in Latin America to know that there can be a change, it's something that it's great. And leave old narratives behind. You can see it in Medellin, the old narco narrative that haunts Colombia. And then you see this shift of getting Medellin to be the most violent city in the world, not in Latin America, in the world, to becoming an innovation city, to becoming a social resilient city. So that kind of mindsets and growth mindset and new narratives have to be thinking about and well designed if we want to change through education, not just content. It's not about content, it's about the stories we tell ourselves. So just leaving that thought for us to move on.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. I think that's a very key point. I remember I was asked to speak at Ciudad de las Ideas in Mexico, and the theme of that year was Mex I Can. And I got up and I, just to be provocative, I said, I'm sorry, my experience of Mexicans is, if you're Mexican, your view is Mex I cannot. And they were a little upset about that. But I think there's a conception that we can't do it, or let's not bother, or etc. And I think that's a key area to go after, is how do you change that mindset? We didn't have time today to hear from Martin Verasavsky, but for those of you in the swarm, we'll put that into the workspace. Martin basically is one of the top entrepreneurs in the world. I think he's created $6 billion enterprises, and is Argentinian, now living in Spain. His commentary was basically, there's an irrevocable and unstoppable rise of entrepreneurship that is increasingly driving the future of Latin America. Mercado Libre is now worth more than all the other Argentinian companies, and that dynamic will drive the future. So he thought that was going to happen either way, but I think the more we can teach people. When I came through the educational system, because my parents are both academics and professionals, I didn't conceive of entrepreneurship as a possibility until I happened to take a course called Technical Entrepreneurship. And that opened my eyes, going, wow, you can start a business. Anybody can start a business. And that mindset, having that available to you is half the battle, right? And then your natural gumption will come out or not. And then you decide how crazy do you want to be, because to be an entrepreneur, you have to be, a bit crazy. And Laura, we know you are crazy already, and many of us on the call share that. So the how do we shift mindset is a key one. I want to close with a couple of thoughts. One is, remember that this initial swarm is really about what do we think Latin America will look like in 10 years from a social, political, economic perspective. And I'm going to give 3 or 4 bullet points that I think are relevant to this discussion. If you haven't seen the movie Ready Player One, go watch it, because it talks about a future world where you put on a virtual reality headset and you're basically living in a metaverse, and you are wherever you are in reality is less relevant than where you are online. And if you watch what's happening in the NFT space, and I've been dabbling a bit in NFTs and crypto, etc., they're literally operating and living in a metaverse. And I think as we move forward, if I project out 10 years, as virtual reality, the resolution in virtual reality will beat the resolution of the human eye in about 2 years, okay? So in 10 years, a virtual reality world will be more real than our real world in a bizarre sense. So now you have an environment where people have bandwidth, technological access to virtual environments. And I think that provides a very rich ground for economic transformation, educational transformation, social, political transformation. So I'd urge you to just think about it from that perspective. I think in 10 years, crypto and the rise of that will break most of the existing monetary systems. It's just starting now. My view is Bitcoin will be worth a few $1 million in 10 years. And anybody that owned a bit will basically be their own bank and be lending out collateralized by their own net worth. You can see that right now in the crypto space. I think it will be pervasive. That will form the basis of a new economic foundation independent of the existing systems. The third thing I think is, as Laura talks about, the opportunity for narratives. I think one of the profound opportunities for media is to deliver narrative. And John Hagel has done a lot of research around the use of narrative as the only way of shifting mindsets and then culture, right? And so if we can get to the point where we can take on a mindset or take on a narrative, this becomes very powerful. Peter Diamandis talks about 6 mindsets: entrepreneurial mindset, exponential mindset, a moonshot mindset, an abundance mindset. And if we can teach that younger generation through the use of narrative, these different mindsets, or at least the opportunity to take that on, this looks like a very powerful, positive formation to me. I think the final piece for me that gets me very excited, specifically about Latin America, is there's a latent natural resource that I think is very untapped, which is the passion. I'm Canadian, not a lot of passion up in Canada, right? Whereas in Latin America, it's spilling onto the streets in the form of blood in some cases, but ideally in a more constructive form. I think if we can harness that, and I see that happening, I'm in Miami these days, and you see the explosion of excitement and interest. I think that will pervade many parts of Latin America. The enormous challenges for me will be for the two that I think are most profound are the patriarchy and corruption, which are linked also, and you heard Diane talk about that. And what do we do about that? So the task is paint the most accurate picture you can of the dynamics that will be in place and what Latin America might look like in 10 years if we unroll these various carpets that we're seeing. So that's the kind of the conversation I think that will be fun to have. Next week, we'll do a similar swarm talking specifically about Latin America, and we'll announce the results of this particular effort and this particular swarm. So thank you all for participating. Lars, what's next? Is there now a more formal session in the how-to space? Do you want to continue with the Zoom? How do you want to progress?
Yes, so thank you, Salim, for guiding us as our Master of Ceremony today. And thank you to all the speakers. to everybody who has been engaging in the conversations. We rely on our collective intelligence to bring hope and new paradigms. So what's happening here? I'll be formally wrapping this session in the next few minutes. And then right after, on the back of this session, we have a work session for the Open ExO Swarm participants who have been selected for the Swarm this week. So you stay on here. I'll give you a 5-minute break, don't worry. But before we get there, I just wanted to, just a few closing comments. It will be really quick. First of all, thank you for the energy and the commitment and the passion that you have all put into these conversations today in the true Latin American spirit and DNA. That's how to play, guys. And that's what we want to show the world, that there's hope, because there is hope. That there are new paradigms waiting out there, because they are there. Many of us are working already to experiment with possible new ways to either support education or even replace over time. And there are solutions that can support the vision that this ExO Quest is all about creating, this desirable 20-year vision. We need you, and you're on this journey with us from here on and throughout. We'll keep you informed about how specifically you can all support and continue to be engaged and involved throughout. And it's super important, and the further and the deeper we get into the process, the more involved participants you're going to see, including yourself, I'm sure. And you're going to see your own commitment and interest also even go up. That's always part of this exciting process. We have been discussing a lot education today. We have, as Salim just mentioned, an education-focused Swarm next week. So we'll be getting back to education and alternatives to education and how to disrupt education. We'll get a lot more of the edge conversations. So those of you who are hungry to take our conversation more in that direction, next week is going to be exciting for you. Stay close and get involved next week as well. You're going to hear from additional speakers and participants who are already doing it. And we are going to share what that looks like. And obviously, we are going to create our own vision to move forward to leapfrog LATAM.
Yes. Lars, I just want to say something real quick. Next week, the folks we have lined up are Andres Oppenheimer, who's the CNN bureau chief for Miami, John Crowley, who's the head of innovation at UNESCO, and Julie Hanna, who's an advisor to Google X and the chairman of Kiva, which thinks about micro-entrepreneurship. So we'll have their voices added to this discussion. Andres wanted to speak on the future of education. He just did a really great article in the Miami Herald about how only 4% of Latin Americans are properly educated. So worth going to see that. Okay, back to you.
Absolutely, thank you. And there are many more joining next week. Those who are super, super deep in the future of education and obviously buying into that agenda. So more about that next week. What's happening the rest of this week? I just wanted to briefly give you a sense of that. Because we will be coming back to you, we'll be playing back to you our understanding and summary of the 10-year outlook for Latin America that builds on the conversations today, that builds on the research that our Open ExO Swarm team will be doing right after this session and the rest of the week. We'll be describing this in a summary, written summary, and presenting back to you guys. So we want your comments on that. We have the rest of the week to put that together, and we have a team from Open ExO who will be doing this research who will be doing discussions, who will also be looking at cases and examples for and against all the different viewpoints we have heard. So you will hear from us throughout the week, and you will be getting invitations for the coming sessions. We want everybody to be on board here during the whole process. Salim started out as usual addressing the immune system and when that starts attacking. And the more you get the feel for disrupting and for working on the edge, the more we are going to get some interesting pushbacks and reactions. So this is where we need this community, which is all of us, that is doing this on the long term, that is here to leapfrog Latin America on the long term. And that's what we also start building as we are starting this process today. So we invite you to join us on this journey, both in the 2 swarms here that are part of the preparation phase, and then the ExO Quest itself that starts on November the 4th. And everything after that will be, hey, let's get this implemented. Guys, there's hope. Guys, there's a wonderful future ahead. Let's create it. So with that, thank you to everybody who has stayed half an hour extra in this formal opening session of the first swarm. I will be giving you a virtual hug now and sending you off to your next activities. And then the Open ExO Swarm members will stay on and work with myself and with Karina and with Jerry after here. And we'll introduce you to the process from here. We'll introduce you to the platforms, the AIs that we are using to extract interesting details in the conversations. So human collective intelligence and AI, I don't know what that gives, but we are here to make it a desirable 20-year vision for Latin America. So thank you all for being here and for being on our journey. Bye for now, and everybody in the Swarm teams, please stay on, and I'll see you here in 5 minutes.
All right, Lars, thank you. We'll see you soon, and thank you all for participating. Bye, folks.